does it give you a competitive edge to build your own experimentation product? No companies out there building their own Google Docs, because if you are Nike, you're not going to beat Adidas by having a better word processing tool. So the same thing, if you are Nike and you want to experiment better, are you going to get a competitive edge from that? Do you have the engineering resources to build that? Or are you just going to do it to try and save costs, because it's often the opposite's true?
Hi, it's Charlotte Bomford of the Experimentation Podcast. Today we have a special guest. His name is Kenneth Kutyn. He has more than 6 years experience working at experimentation software vendors based in Vancouver, San Francisco, London, Amsterdam, and now Singapore. And he has helped customers across EMEA and APAC build and run experimentation programs. He also wrote his master's thesis on the role of experimentation in enterprise software development and has a passion for data visualization and data-driven decision-making. When not talking A/B testing, Ken loves to travel, as you can tell by the places that he went through, and cook and explore Singapore with his family. That's a very interesting journey I've been in, Ken. I'm pretty sure the listeners would want to learn how you got into experimentation. What role are you in today?
Yeah, definitely. Good to chat with you, Charlotte. It's good to be here on the podcast.
Definitely.
So how did I get into experimentation? I was working at Oracle on the go-to-market team for their BI products, helping with data visualization. And I didn't know much about A/B testing. We all kind of heard it vaguely in the news about this thing Google was doing, and that was about it. And I came across a role at a company called Optimizely and started looking into it. And I thought it was really neat that you've got this discipline where there's a UI and design side to it, there's a tech side to it, there's the math and statistics to it. And the more I looked into it and ended up getting the role, I kind of fell into this world and I was really excited to be part of it. This incredible new way to make decisions, to build better experiences, to ultimately make products better for customers, and to do so in such a data-driven way that's never really been possible in the past, at least not at this scale and frequency of iteration. So it's kind of how I arrived in the experimentation world, a little bit by accident, but I've been loving it ever since.
Where do you see yourself going with the role that you have today?
Yeah, I think that's part of what I like about the job. You're working with companies on the cutting edge of building great products, and on continually trying to strive to build a better experience for their users. There's kind of been this interesting journey for experimentation. We used to think of it as just A/B testing. We call it CRO sometimes. And maybe like 5-6 years ago, it was very common that companies had a CRO specialist, a CRO manager, who often worked a little bit in isolation. I know you're not doing something so different yourself. Yeah.
Yes.
That's how it still looks for a lot of companies, and definitely was the norm 6 years ago, where we've got one person in this role, often even at a big company, one person who's taking on, just improve our conversion rates. And they're doing a lot of A/B testing, and they don't get a ton of support from marketing. They don't get a ton of support from dev or from product. Often they fall under the marketing umbrella, and they're just trying to tweak and improve things. And we've seen this evolve a lot, right? Companies have seen great successes from experimentation and some great ROI as well. And that's led to a broadening of scope, which is great. More resources, developers who are now part of CRO teams, more UX time to devote it to experiments. And in parallel, there's been a lot of adoption from product teams. So engineers have been testing for a long time, right? In terms of basic blue-green deployments and simple feature flags. But now product teams are really buying in and testing every feature and realizing that, we should consider everything we launch as an experiment until we actually know that there's user value attached to it. It's just an idea until we reach that point. And so that seems to be where things are trending. And I mean, more broadly, where does it go from here in the future? It's a good question. Anyone's bet. There are lots of trends happening, maybe in parallel. Everyone's trying to inject AI into everything right now,
I
have some
agree.
some mixed feelings about. And there's always in the software world. So I've been working at software vendors for experimentation for the past 6 years. We see these cycles of consolidation, and then new best of breed standalone players pop up, and then there's a cycle of consolidation again. And we've seen that with experimentation, where a lot of companies, like your marketing automation tool, well, guess what? Now you have a A/B testing feature, so you can test your marketing messages. Your landing
Mm,
page design tool, great. Now you also have an A/B test. So you get these big players who add the A/B testing features. You've got the focused A/B testing players, and everything in between. And I think that cycle will kind of continue to happen over time as well.
yeah, I agree. I agree because there are again, like you've said, there are a software for email marketing, and then they would inject like, oh, you can A/B test what type of variation would be perfect for a specific segmentation. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. You've also mentioned something about like how do you feel about AI being injected to different, you know, experimentation softwares? Is that something you feel like would be an advantage in the future or disadvantage in the future?
Yeah, there are 100% use cases. I would never debate that. What I'm wary of, and I hope and think a lot of people are wary of, is it's a lot of marketing hype, right? We have to cut through.
Mm,
So you go to a landing page for a software product and it says AI driven experimentation, optimize every experience to every user. And you got to think like, what does that mean? Is it reliable?
mm,
And what I would come back to is it measurable?
yeah,
So at the point where you're delivering a unique experience to every visitor, how do you determine what's your control group to see if those experiences are working?
I agree. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Mm,
so
mm,
hopefully you can find a sweet spot where, yeah, there are use cases for AI and ML. Product recommendations is an obvious one, right? And
mm,
then you
mm,
can have a holdout group who gets a static list of product recommendations, compare it to the people who get their personalized list. And now
yeah.
we're able to make some statistical inferences about the
Mm,
uplift those recs are driving, um,
mm,
even though we are getting down to the one-to-one level of personalization. But what we want to avoid is just AI for the sake of it, and you know, um, this kind of black box of throw it over the fence, see what comes back, and assume it's better than the existing model, or assume it's better than the more human-driven model.
okay, so let's get straight to it. Google Optimize. It's sunsetting in September 2023. A lot of companies, they're like going crazy, scrambling right now. I wasn't really scrambling, like let's just say they're because there's a limited amount of time, they're now like looking for a replacement, right? Now for those who haven't found a replacement yet, what would you advise for them, like when looking into these features?
Yeah, great question. It's certainly top of mind in experimentation zero world, and
Yeah.
I find it really interesting, like the sentiment on LinkedIn, because we've got this Google Analytics sunset as well happening around the same time.
Mm,
And there's so much content out there and resources and migration guides for GA4 that, yeah,
yeah.
some people are complaining about GA4, some people aren't, some people are ready, others are not. But everyone's kind of talking about, is it a good fit, and here's my migration guide. If you look at Google Optimize, on the other hand, the sentiment is 100%, we don't know what we're doing next. And
Mm,
there's not this same kind of obvious migration path. And there's not as much content out there on here are the best things you can do to prepare yourself and to find a better solution and to
yeah.
transition, right? So it's a very different
Mm,
feel, despite the fact we have these two sunsets happening almost coinciding with each other.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when I start to break it down and think about like what can you do if you are on Google Optimize right now, and let's say you're using it with some consistency, running a number of experiments a month, and you want to keep that going. A few choices. The first is, you can try and find something similar. There are a whole number of, we can call them visual editor or client side type.
Yeah.
What you see is what you get testing tools out there. Um, Ranging from some very low cost to free ones to more expensive ones that are part of like an Adobe and Oracle suite, and again everything in
Mm,
between.
mm, mm.
That seems like the obvious choice, right? But there are a few reasons to maybe pause before you jump into that. The first is that, it's well, that's only one way to experiment. And the market, the industry seems to be shifting towards a lot more of what I would term full stack experimentation. So experimentation
Mm-hmm.
more tightly integrated with your code base, usually powered by SDKs and APIs. And that
Mm-hmm.
starts to unlock new use cases. It starts to unlock better performance, more ability to experiment across channels, deepen your tech stack, and so on. So that's one reason to hesitate. Maybe you're ready for full stack experimentation. There are a few ways to kind of gauge that.
Yeah, I was about to ask you that question. What do you mean by like if it's like we have different types of listeners we have with the at the experimentation? Would you be able to explain or expand further on what full stack testing is, and how do you know if the company is ready for full stack testing?
Yeah, certainly. So what we have with Google Optimize and similar tools is you typically have a JavaScript tag, you add to your tag manager or your HTML file.
Mm.
It downloads some JavaScript and runs some experiments on your site. So you get a nice visual editor. You can click and drag elements and make changes. And largely, you can be independent of dev for simple experiments.
Yeah.
Where this starts to fall over, though, is, oh, I want to build something a bit more complex. Now you're getting development involved. Can still do it through a visual editor type tool, but you do need the developer to help you out.
Yeah.
It also means that all your experiments are limited to what can run in a browser. And more companies, their experiences do not stay in the browser. You've got mobile apps, you've got kiosks at an airport, you've got
Mm.
logic that exists server side on a watch, whatever it may be. So you need to be able to experiment across these channels, and you can't do that with a tool that only runs in the browser. So that's where full stack testing comes in. The idea that, hey, let's give you a way to get an experiment decision in anywhere you have code, anywhere your product or your logic exists. We want to let you experiment there. And that kind of really opens up a whole number of new use cases to testing teams.
Mm.
It's a very different way of working. All of a sudden, you're launching experiments the same way you launch features in code, and it's well suited to a product team, a cross-functional product team where you've got PMs and engineers and hopefully UX and analysts, working on the same team building features and experiments, compared
Mm.
to a visual editor tool where, one person or a marketeer with little technical skills and resources could be publishing some tests themselves. So very different way of working, but full stack testing does open up a whole bunch of new doors.
This is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing. It helps us a bunch. Now back to the episode.
So the question is, how do you know? Because again, like I agree with you, full stack testing is quite it's a complex thing. How would you tell when the company is ready for full stack testing?
Yeah, a few questions I would be asking myself. What kind of use cases are important to me? And we don't have to lie to ourselves and say, oh yeah, I want to do server side testing. When if you're a company that makes landing pages, maybe that's all you need to do. But at the point where you're saying, oh, I wish we could change the search algorithm a little bit to try out some different weighing parameters to see which works best. I wish we
Now
could
that the
experiment
API
with.
is much more complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish we could try different pricing. I wish we could test into
Mm.
our mobile app. I wish we could, change some logic or some content that lives on a server that's pulled down from mobile apps and the web browser. So that's one as use cases. The second, like I said, is kind of your team and how you want to actually launch experiments. Do you want it to be this layer that sits on top of your website only, or do you want to be launching features in code? And for product teams, they'd actually rather that because they don't have this kind of shadow layer, or something that's here called to as like shadow CMS, where you've got
Mm.
two different systems that are managing what appears on your site. The third is, the different channels that you have. So if it's different touch points outside the browser. And another one is performance as well. So when you're using one of those visual editor solutions with a JavaScript tag, there'll always be some performance hit in terms of that tag has to go and download more resources from another server. There's no way around
Mm.
that.
Mm.
With full stack testing, whether it's running in the browser or on the back end, you can achieve much closer to zero latency. You're able to do some more
Oh
of
wow.
the work up front,
Mm.
and
Mm.
basically test without having to compromise a little bit of loading time. So that's another reason I see some teams seriously considering switching over.
Yeah, the loading time is always the issue.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so we've touched on earlier. You've mentioned about Google Optimize and GA4 sunsetting almost at the same time. So with the companies moving from Google Optimize to a new solution, what would they need to ensure that it works well with GA4?
Yeah, so I guess just going back one step, even kind of said
Mm.
maybe one reason for companies to pause in their decision making process to replace Geo is the potential to go full stack. The second, I would say, is that this GA4 migration. I'm also seeing some companies are pausing and saying, let's not assume GA4 is right for us. They basically are taking a bigger look at what they do for analytics and a group experimentation in with that and trying to figure that out. And then they can, as a secondary step, decide which experimentation solution they need. And so if you jump into, let's find the best experiment product for us, and then, we also need to find an analytics product, then you've kind of almost maybe done the backwards order that you should.
Mm.
So I think that, if you have indeed evaluated and decided that GA4 is the right fit for your company, at least for the time being, Google has come out and almost directly said they're not going to develop their own experimentation capability in GA4.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm.
They kind of alluded to that in a couple blog posts and product updates. So we shouldn't wait around for the new Google Optimize. But yeah, you need to find something that fits with what your team needs. And that's not just the technical features of the tool, it's also the company you're going to be partnering with. So you can be honest with yourself. How much support do you need? Do you need
Mm.
a vendor or a partner who can help you strategize tests, who can help you with implementation? Those types of things are a big one. And some companies and some agencies are well suited to get you up and running with a product and kind of offer you ongoing support in that. Others are much more, well placed to be a great software vendor, but you buy the product and you kind of figure out how to use it yourself.
Yeah,
Um,
that's much more complicated. Yeah.
yeah. And people are different places in that, different levels of
Mm.
maturity, and that's okay. But
Yeah. So would you like? Are you? So what are you saying? You're saying like, let's go with an alternative for Google Optimize, and if GA4 is fine, let's go with that for the meantime until we find another solution that fits the company's needs, and just start from there.
yeah, exactly. I think
Mm.
what's interesting is Google obviously comes from a long marketing background.
Mm.
They're interested in selling you ads. That's their
Of
business,
course.
and so that's why Google is always going to focus on how did you get users to your site, which ad campaigns are performing well, how can we help you with your
Mm.
SEO, right? That's the goal of
Yeah.
Google Analytics.
Yeah.
That being said, GA4 moving more to this event model, it is getting more into what we might call product analytics a little bit. And Adobe just last week, maybe the week before, announcing their new product analytics solution. It's really showing that even the big players are starting to recognize the importance of not just acquiring users, but engaging them, keeping them happy, retaining them,
Mm.
making sure they renew at the end of the day, keep using our apps and products. And so, shameless plug, I'm working in Amplitude now, where we've been doing product analytics for some time. It's a great validation to see that, there is value and there's a good reason to focus on what happens after we get the user, not just how do we get them in the first place. And so, yeah, if I was looking at new analytics and new experimentation product right now for a company I worked at, those are the kind of things I'd be looking at, like end to end. Can I analyze from the customer seeing one of my ads to landing on a landing page to signing up for the first time to retaining, renewing, and upselling and cross selling? Like I've been looking at that end to end journey and seeing if that fits for me. and if I'm able to experiment at each stage along that journey as well. And if I can get that from one vendor or multiple vendors who offer me the best solution for each piece, so be it. But I'd be trying to kind of look end to end like that. And that probably means the marketing team and the product team need to start working a bit more closely together, in terms of no longer having two disparate data sets, two separate sets of tooling for people to learn, two sources of truth essentially, and all of a sudden having analytics in one place where they can see the whole customer journey and have one version of the truth to kind of go off and make strategic company decisions. At the end of the day, that's what analytics and experimentation is here to solve for.
Yeah, I agree with the end-to-end thing. I think that's most important place where you're going to get the data, like where are people going, what they're interested in, like, and what they do from end, like where they came from. That's actually really, really good, and that's good advice. I have a question though. So for companies who have capability to create their own solution in-house, what do you feel about that? What do you think about that? And is that the right choice for some of the companies?
Yeah, good question. It's a tempting choice. I see lots of companies playing with this idea. A few considerations. I mean, the short version is like any software product or project, this always comes in a lot more expensive and time consuming than you expect.
I agree.
And if you're a Google or a Netflix or a Booking.com and you've got almost unlimited engineering resources, then maybe it's worth considering. And the reason why you would do this is you've got to ask yourself, do we have a special need, a unique need in how we experiment that we're not going to get from a vendor, and that no vendor is going to build
That's a good
because
point.
our business model is so different, right? Does it
Yeah.
give you a competitive edge to build your own experimentation product? No company's out there building their own Google Docs, because if you are Nike, you're not going to beat Adidas by having a better word processing tool. So the same thing, if you are Nike and you want to experiment better, are you going to get a competitive edge from that? Do you have the engineering resources to build that, or are you just going to do it to try and save costs? Because it's often the opposite's true. There are a few studies around building custom software that usually it's an order of magnitude more expensive than getting something from a vendor. And there's a lot of future proofing you get from a vendor as well. You change your tech stack in 2 years and start using Go instead of Python. Your vendor already has an SDK for Go, and they've got 25 customers using it already. Whereas you built your whole experimentation stack on Python, and now you can't migrate, or you got to pause experimentation for 6 months while you update the whole experimentation stack too. So I certainly wouldn't say,
Pros and cons,
I wouldn't say building is always bad. I would say I've seen a lot of companies build something and underestimate the costs and the time to value, and that the solution you end up with is often very technical and serves engineers and analysts, leaving product and marketing a bit underserved by that in-house solution is typically how it ends up.
I'm actually interested about what you said about the cost, right? Because for most of the experimentation softwares out there, it's kind of like you're buying a license to use their software, and so that would pretty much, like, if you have a capability in-house to build a software for like 1 year's worth of that, the other, like the external experimentation software, and you don't have to maintain it that much, wouldn't that be cheaper instead of like having it much more expensive when you buy someone else's software?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, most of these companies who've built internally have blogged about it. They're using it as ways to attract engineers who want to work on interesting problems, right? Which actually means that places like Uber and Netflix have publicly stated how many full-time equivalents they have just building and maintaining experimentation tools.
Okay.
And if you look at those, it's not like two. It's common, like 50 and 20 engineers working full-time on maintaining this product they're building in-house. Depends where you are in the world, but 20 full-time engineers in the Bay Area at Netflix salaries is a lot more than most companies spend on off-the-shelf software. Even in Amsterdam, I won't mention any specifics. I was aware of one company who was looking at buying an experimentation product. They were quoted around 300,000 euros per year for their volumes, and they decided to build in-house, and they had a team of 6 full-time equivalents working for multiple years to get it off the ground. And so it very
Oh.
quickly adds up, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, the thing about experimentation as well is perhaps more than any software solution you buy, you can measure ROI from it quite easily.
Mm, mm.
It's often, a 5, a 10, a 20x over what at least what you're spending on subscriptions. You should factor in, of course, your own manpower and everything that goes into
Yep.
it. So that's something, another piece of advice I'd give people who are looking at Google Optimize and trying to justify whether it's a build or a buy. Can you look back over the last year or two at the experiments you've run on revenue metrics, the uplift you're seeing, and hopefully use that as a case to get some
Make a
budget.
decision.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and maybe some budget you didn't have before if you're even on Google Optimize free plan. Could be the first time you're going to pay for a subscription for a software product for experimentation, but hopefully the wins you've got in the past 12 months should more than justify a new subscription cost for you.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. That is very insightful. I was thinking about the costs earlier, and I was like, probably it might be cheaper, but that makes a lot of sense having that overhead and everything. But yeah, I want to know. We're talking about experimentation software. What do you think is where's the trend going to? What's the next, what's the next big thing in
Mm-hmm.
experimentation software?
Yeah, there are a few trends I see. One we kind of touched on is AI, and there's some interesting applications there, of course, around personalization within tests, around recommendations, helping with interpreting analysis and such. Another one that I see happening, I think is really critical, is the software doing a better job of kind of helping you manage your experimentation program.
Mm.
So everyone, all the experimentation software on the market, helps you build and run a test, and usually there's analysis built into that as well. That's kind of the core. All the products do that in some form or another. If you do an experimentation program at your company and you're running like 2 tests a month, and the typical company is getting an experiment winner on 20 to 30% of their experiments, so a stat sig uplift, you're running for a lot of months with 0 ROI, right? And maybe at the end of the year, you have a couple with a stat sig uplift, and maybe one of those is on revenue, and you're in the red on your ROI analysis. So really, experimentation works when you as a team are running 5, 10, or more experiments a month. And that's when you start to trip over the things that you can kind of hack together for a single test. Things like capturing and prioritizing ideas in a repeatable, reliable framework, documenting hypotheses, ensuring you've got the right backing data and the right metric selection. Sharing results with people in the team, all of these things that need to happen better as you move from 1 experiment a month to 10 experiments a month. And so that's a trend I see in software is that there's this focus on how can we help companies with their experimentation programs, not just with the tech side of building and running a test. And I think that's really good. Like maintaining best practices as you scale is something software can help with. It can't solve entirely, but it can definitely help with.
That's interesting when you said 2 tests a month may not be enough of an uplift to see an ROI. How many tests would you recommend? Are you after quality of tests or quantity of tests? I'm just interested in that because I've seen a lot of podcasts before, it's the more the tests you run, the more chances of winning kind of thing. And there are people who would be like, probably 4 tests are quality tests and you'll see 200% uplifts would be fine. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a number or even a rule of thumb. Um, I think it comes down to, first of all, a good prioritization model where you're looking
Mm,
at, what's the potential impact, how many people make it to this part of this flow, this part of the site or app. So if the test does work and gets us a 10% uplift, what does that mean at the end of the day? And you can counter that with an effort estimation for building the test. So then you've got kind of these two competing axes to help you prioritize things and
mm,
start from the top and work your way down as you go through various experiments. I've heard some teams who will try and pick a couple, Hail Marys every month and pick a couple simpler, more likely ones. So hopefully they're driving incremental improvements while they
mm,
try kind of the moon shots in parallel,
mm,
to kind of have a bit of a balance in terms of their, I don't know, risk reward profile, if you will.
mm, mm.
So I don't know that there's a standard or a single rule of thumb. And like we said, as more product teams take this over, the testing backlog and the product backlog become kind of merged. And
That's true. Yep.
product management has had methods for prioritization for a long time, which now experimentation is somewhat benefiting from.
Okay. There's a lot of companies, like we've said in the start, that are um, scrambling to look for a replacement. There are also a lot of experimentation software out in the market. And to be honest, like I feel like some features overlap each other's features, and they're kind of like almost the same thing but different brand. So if you're a company, or if you're advising a company, uh, and they have like these, like, let's say 5 to 10 experimentation software, what's the first things that we need to look at, or a company needs to look at before they decide on an experimentation software?
Yeah, I'd start with a, a self-assessment of where you are as a company and team for your culture and appetite for experimentation. First, to assess how much help do we need. Have we
Mm,
been running 10 tests a month for the past 2 years independently and ready to continue with that? Versus we have an agency who builds half our tests and we have our software vendor on site once a month delivering training sessions. And, we've hired 6 new PMs in the last 3 months and none of them have experimentation knowledge. That's going to play a big role in what you expect from your vendor, your partner, your agency you work with in terms of, who can you work with. Then, I'd look at, what are our most important touch points for our customer? Is it all browser based? Are we mobile first? Do we have a lot of infrastructure experiments and back end business logic and engineering logic we want to experiment on? That'll influence as well. Um, where do the analytics live? Keep coming back to that, right?
mm,
Have we
mm,
standardized on one of the big analytics players? Are we using a more focused best of breed solution, something in between? And do we expect to do the experiment analysis in the experiment tool, or do we expect to do the experiment analysis in our analytics product, or maybe something more manual in-house? That will influence as well. We start to think about how easily can we get data out of this tool? How reliable is that data? Is it a single source of truth, or do we have kind of discrepancies now?
mm,
Another one is even like, how are we going to target experiments? If you're doing a lot of top of the funnel experimentation, right, landing pages, maybe they're all general tests. But if you're testing in the product, you've got different plans and different regions you support, different types of
mm,
user personas. You want to do targeting based off that. Um, you might not have all that user context in the experimentation product. That might live in a CDP, in your data warehouse, in your analytics solution. And you've got to start to think about, can these things work together in a reliable way and in a performant way whereby I can say, okay, I want to target an experiment to the people who've made 4 purchases in the last month and are on my free plan. Um, what would that look like? And is that something I could do again at scale? Or is that going to be a lot of a lot of work for an engineer to hack together, and I'm only going to do it once a year?
Mm-mm. So, what are the features that you usually like look at in terms of the experimentation software? Because I feel like you have like this um, there are softwares where you can prioritize tests now, where you can write almost like a Trello thing that is already integrated. And then you have like after the experimentation, they can also integrate like the heat maps and all the other things that you need post test analysis.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of experimentation software, aside from those things, is there anything else that you might be able to like add to the, okay, aside from these, what are the other factors that can be like a possibility to look at in terms of like choosing a software or an experimentation program?
Yeah, maybe a couple others to keep in mind would be things like what kind of technologies they're using in the front end. Some solutions are better than others. If we're just talking about the visual editor world for a moment, some are better than others at handling dynamic content, like you've got a React or an Angular or an XJS site. That can be a struggle for visual editors, and some handle it better than others. On the statistics side, these solutions, some are using quite similar stats engines. Like a Bayesian
Mm,
inference model is quite common these days. Others are using something a little less common, like sequential testing. And, it gets technical quickly, goes over my head quickly. I don't
yes.
mind admitting that. But I always tell companies, like, look, if you're going to be making business decisions off this, don't assume they're all the same and don't assume it's good enough. Bring in a data scientist on your team. Bring in one of your statisticians or someone who can, look at the tech documentation of the stats model and see if you like it, see if you think it's reliable, and if it will work for you. So yeah, it gets down to like the program management functionality, support for your specific technology, statistics
Mm,
engines you can work with, targeting you can work with, and then the big one is just integrations. Will it
I
connect
agree.
well
Yes.
to your analytics and play nicely there? If you're doing any targeting, where does that data live, and can you get that into the experimentation product? Those types of things as well.
It's awesome. Last question, probably. You also wrote on your thesis on experimentation, which is, you know, interesting because I don't think I've met anyone who wrote about experimentation so far. What have you learned from your thesis?
Yeah, my main goal was really to try and unpack this link that we've all accepted. Everyone agrees experimentation makes you innovative. And I thought, okay, let's take a step back and see, A, is there actual evidence that this is true? And B, if so, why? Why might that be the case? And the first challenge you encounter is, well, no one can agree what innovation actually means, right? There are a
Mm,
few kind of
mm,
soft definitions that get thrown around about coming out with a new product, solves customers, delivers value for you, delivers value for the customer, um, something novel that hasn't been done before, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? That's
mm,
great. But if we're going to try and measure this, we need a definition we can use in numbers, and there are a few different ideas there as well. Um, like Boston Consulting Group defines it as the amount of revenue that you've obtained from new products, taking into account the spend on new product development and your revenue from the rest of your portfolio, and those types of things. You can look at things like patents, which aren't a great metric, but they say something. At least you prioritize IP and getting new things to market. So there are a few different ways to measure innovation, and then um, you got to look at, okay, so how much are companies actually experimenting? And for that, I pulled a lot of data. I found a database of about 10 or 15 million job postings from the last
oh,
five
wow.
years or so, and
Okay.
I scraped it for certain keywords. And in order to benchmark, I wanted to look not just at experimentation, A/B testing, but things like heat mapping, session recording,
Mm,
analytics in general, and then some other kind of practices that we see from product teams like road mapping, prototyping, agile, all of these kind of keywords. And I took that job posting data. I did the same thing with a bunch of LinkedIn profiles.
sounds like a lot of work.
Not too bad. At least there's some tools out there to help you with it. And tried to figure out which companies were actually experimenting the most. And
Mm,
then what was interesting is yeah, I found that of the different practices, so session recording, experimentation, prototyping, blah blah blah. Um, Experimentation did have the strongest correlation with innovation based on a couple of definitions. And
Wow.
so,
Yeah.
so it really seems like, yeah, there's this, again, causation is tough. Correlation is a bit easier. There's definitely a correlation with innovative output in enterprise software development companies and their propensity to experiment.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you got to happily share the thesis, but it's a bit long and dry. Um, but you can start to get into, okay, well then why might this be? And it keeps coming down to the culture, right? How does a company view risk? How do they view new ideas? Where do they think new ideas should come from? Um,
Mm.
and how willing are they to try out new things and give them a chance, give them their day in the sun, and see if they stick and drive value. Um, that's kind of where the
That,
theory keeps taking it back to, really understanding customers at the core of it.
yeah, it's really interesting. Innovation is through experimentation you get innovation. That's actually very, very interesting because you won't know anything unless you experiment, right? You won't be able to find a different solution if you don't know that the problem exists. So it's very interesting that you said that. I'm actually really I would say blessed and lucky that the team that I'm in, they're very experiment focused.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I would be interested, like, what would you say to companies who are able to do experimentation, but they're not doing that?
Companies who are able to experiment but aren't yet, what would be kind of the advice for
Yeah.
them? Or
Yeah, exactly. What would you advise to companies like, hey, get into experimentation because you might, you know, see or find issues that doesn't you think that does not exist
mm,
and might help you in the future. What would you um, advise to those companies? Or yeah,
yeah, maybe the most convincing argument you can make is that their
yeah.
competitors are probably doing it.
Ah,
Um,
true.
but yeah, I think at the core of this, why do we do analytics? Why do we experiment? Why do we look
Mm,
at session recordings? We've all kind of acknowledged that the closer we can get to our customers, the better
mm,
products we can build. I mean, that's, if I could summarize agile in one sentence, it would be that, right? Like, how much feedback can we get? How quickly can we iterate on it? Put it in our
mm,
product as a feedback loop, and get it in front of customers again. It's just like, get it in front of customers as frequently as we possibly can.
mm,
Hopefully that's not too controversial of a thought, and I see it as really natural progression from that thought is, what's the quickest and easiest way to get ideas in front of customers and see if they like them? It's experimentation. It's the only way you can do that so quickly and at scale and in a statistically robust way. So I don't know if that would help convince anyone, but that's kind of at least the theoretical argument I would use to try and encourage some appetite to experiment more.
you probably had them as like with the your competitors are probably doing it.
Hopefully. If not,
Awesome.
Netflix and Facebook are, and everyone will be competing with them in some way or another. So
Exactly, exactly. Awesome. Well, Ken, it's been amazing to have you. I would like to thank you on behalf of Experimentation and thank you for the insights. It's been really good. Yeah, that's it.
great. Thanks so much for having me.